I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Hiro Murai and Nate Matteson, both of whom are executive producers on the post-apocalyptic HBO Max Station 11. I love this show so much, guys. I've spoken to so many people from the cast and crew, and everyone feels the same way about how you all came together to create something that really is life-affirming, and it's about love and hope and humanity and art. And I really, really enjoyed that. I'm just wondering, you guys were so critical to bringing this to life. What did you most love about the story and why you wanted to bring it to life? Maybe I'll go to you first, Nate.
What do I love about the story so much? I think it's the perspective that Patrick brought to this really very emotionally fraught concept. He always wanted to bring a spirit of hopefulness, a spirit of joy to the project, and I know that's part of what attracted Hiro to it first. Was just a freshness to a genre piece.
Yeah. I specifically, when Pat first approached me about the project, I specifically told him that I wasn't crazy about post-apocalypse as a genre, just because it's so dour and aesthetically monochromatic, and there are films and books that I love in the genre, but it just felt like a very exhausting prospect to kind of pour yourself into that kind of nihilism that's prevalent in that genre. And what I realized soon after talking to him is that he's kind of turning the whole thing on its head, by making it this sort of like absurdist story about rebirth and hope rather than despair. And so that just felt like a fresh way to talk about it, in a way that I hadn't really seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. I was even reticent to get into the show because we've been living this pandemic for 2 years now, and the last thing I wanted to do was watch it on TV, but it's not that at all. And in fact, it's I found it like a balm to actually kind of slightly help us even get through it. There are certain episodes that ring so true to how we're all feeling, and and the way that the show is created, it's not like derelict buildings and zombies. It's something else. I can't really even describe it. And Hiro, given your background as a director, and you brought the pilot to life plus episode 3, so your contribution to the look and feel is significant. So talk us through what you and Patrick were going for. You're trying to, as you say, turn this thing on its head and give us something really new in this particular genre.
Yeah, specifically with episode 1, I think the thing we really wanted to hammer home was the idea that maybe the experience of living through modern times is in some ways more harrowing and more oppressive than living in this, aftermath world where nature has sort of reclaimed the space and become more pastoral and peaceful in some way. Obviously there are lives lost, and it is a story about hardship in a lot of ways, but in episode 1, we keep cutting back and forth between the night cityscape in Chicago, where Jeevan's trying to get Kirsten back home, and flashes of year 20, where you see glimpses of these sort of pastoral, quiet landscapes. And we really wanted to kind of state, make a clear statement about our intent that in some ways our depiction of the future will be brighter and a little bit softer than what you would imagine post-apocalypse to look like, and I think a lot of that came down to making the Chicago modern day scenes feel a little more oppressive and a little bit lonely in some ways, because it is about this, these two individuals that are kind of lost in this city. It's a beautiful city, but it's also very towering and massive, and in some ways very isolating, especially at night. And so we really wanted to hammer home the contrast between those two things. And when you get to year 20 in episode 2, you really get to see the other side of that coin. So we were aware of what was novel about our approach to the thing. And I think a lot of that we try to execute in the visual language of it.
Yeah,
that was a big thing that excited me, and seeing what you guys were doing early on was really trying to figure out how to handle the amount of time that the show is going to try to portray. I think in those first 2 episodes that you directed, Hiro, between 1 and 3, it spans about 35 years of time from 2005 to 2040. So, and I know there was a strong interest in doing that without falling into tropes of the way in which to kind of convey the passage of time or jumping around through time visually. But that was like just being a sort of fly on the wall of that process. That was some of the most exciting stuff those early days, was trying to figure out the visual language of how it was going to handle its time span.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nate, you teamed up with Hiro a few years ago to co-found your production company, Superfrog. And you recently mentioned in another article that you guys just want to make things that we haven't seen before and things that are worth making. And obviously, I think this is absolutely fits that bill. So were you happy with the outcome when all is said and done, that you can add this to your roster of productions that your company's been able to bring out?
Oh, I mean, extremely so. I think we took this on just a few months into forming the company. I think we formed the company in January of 2019. Somewhere around April or May, I think, of 2019 is when this came to Hiro as something to direct, and Pat was just so extremely generous of letting us as a duo as well into the process. And you really couldn't ask for a more exciting and challenging first endeavor as a young company to take on.
Yeah. I mean, I think people may be aware of this, but given you're making a show about a pandemic, well, not about one, but it's set in that period. And then, of course, we're all hit with it. And I know this comes up all the time in the media, but it's something that I don't think we can really shy away from it. You're making something about a pandemic, then production's shut down. You all come back quite a while later to continue on with the journey. And now you're living this double parallel world where you're portraying something quite extreme, but we're also living through it as well. And I just wonder, guys, was that eerie, uncanny? Did you just not even think about it because you were in the zone? What was that like? Because just us watching it felt really strange. I can't imagine what it felt like making it.
I mean, yeah, it's one of the strangest experiences of my life. I mean, even outside of making this show, it was the strangest experience of my life. But to be making these first 2 episodes, and we were probably mid-edit when everything started shutting down, and one day Nate came into the edit bay and said, "Hey, we all have to go home," and we were still cutting at that point, and we had heard rumblings about the coronavirus while we were shooting, but it felt like such a foreign concept, and you couldn't really wrap your head around the distance and the scope of this thing. And so for it to kind of gradually kind of creep into our lives and eventually become what it became, it was very strange. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, I think one of the interesting things about making this show, and I can't speak for everyone, but because we were, the shutdown happened and we were isolated for so long, we were all kind of trying to figure out how to emotionally cope with the idea of a pandemic, and our need for community, and what it feels like to be isolated, and all those things. And so it weirdly became a great place for us to kind of figure out, negotiate our feelings, and kind of figure out how we feel about how we process all these things. And I think a lot of that ended up in the final product of the show, which I'm very proud of. And I think that is, a lot of it has to do with, people connecting to it and kind of, processing their own experience with the pandemic through the show.
Yeah. I think I'm connecting with what Hiro's saying, and just the word gratitude. Like it's a strange thing to have had this opportunity, but I'm so grateful to have been able to try to unpack my own experiences over the last couple of years inside of the making of the show, and to see how what Patrick and the rest of the writers and producers and cast and HODs on the show had been, how what they had been experiencing over the last couple of years started to really add to the layers of what went into the making of the thing.
Yeah. A lot of this question has had a lot to do with Patrick's writing and of course the whole writing team. But I'm wondering what you think, because Hiro, when you did the pilot, it's, it plants us in this world where the pandemic is starting to rip through Chicago, and Jeevan and Kirsten are trying to find somewhere to shelter in place, and they do the shopping, and it starts getting quite uncomfortable and unsettling. And then, of course, as the show progresses, it really rewards patience. But the audience needs to stick with you, and the pilot doesn't really handhold us too much. We really have to kind of wait for and then experience some of those payoff moments. Was there ever any trepidation amongst all of you in the team about whether the audience would be willing to go on this ride because of the way it's structured and the way that you mentioned earlier? It flicks between timelines and it can be quite confusing, but of course it's really worth it if you stick with it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things that drew me into the project was the sheer ambition of it. When Pat first pitched me the idea, there's no elevator pitch for this thing. He walked me through the entire story in a 3.5-hour coffee meeting, because he had to talk about every character and every arc just to get the idea of what it feels like to digest all those storylines at once, because it really doesn't work if it's not a kind of an intertwining tapestry, right? And so then the scope of that was was really always exciting to me about it, and I knew that for that to work, really, you have to buy into sort of individual character dynamics. And for the pilot, really, it just came down to casting the right Jeevan and Kirsten, and have their banter and dynamic be involving and watchable enough that you kind of just ride it out, even if it is sort of we aren't leaning into the kind of a spectacle of a disaster show. You're kind of watching that happen in the periphery as you're watching Jeevan and Kirsten kind of figure each other out. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely requires patience, but that was always part of the appeal for me, at least.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think once we get to episode 3, for some reason, it really just kicks in for me. And I loved following the Miranda storyline. I didn't realize how pivotal she'd be to the whole narrative structure of the whole series. But there's a moment at the end of the episode 3 where her and Jim are they're at that conference, and they realize the world's falling apart and they're going to die. And they just admit that they're scared, and then they just embrace. And I remember thinking, yeah, no shit, I'm scared too. And someone gave me a hug. Like, it was a really simple moment. I just was wondering if you can recall back on the day when you were shooting that, what it was like, because at that point you had already started to experience a pandemic in the real world.
That was day 1 or 2.
That might have been day 1 or 2 of our shoot.
No way, really?
Block shot episode 1 and 2, 1 and 3 at the same time.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of questions about whether, this thing was going to work. Can you tell these small character stories inside this big genre thing? And specifically, the character Miranda is just so difficult to pin down because she's so mysterious. And yeah, I mean, but when Miranda did the monologue in the pitch meeting, and then we shot the scene between her and Tim afterwards, I think we all just kind of knew there was a kind of a North Star for the show, where it just needs to build to that point, because I think even when we shot it, we knew that we had a moment that felt really special and life affirming, and kind of a tone that we were really aiming for, but also absurd and funny at times. And so it really, I don't usually like to schedule these big sort of pivotal moments of an episode first thing in our shooting schedule, but it was very helpful. You know, we were like, okay, this could work, and we just need to kind of build towards this thing that's working.
Wow, I mean, that really set the tone. Yeah, so that's a really pivotal moment. But of course, if the Jeevan and Kirsten storyline doesn't quite work, particularly the pilot as you're setting it all up, then we have a problem. And thankfully, those two actors, Matilda and Himesh, were just incredible. This paternal, fraternal, I couldn't really even pinpoint what was going on there, because it could have come off even creepy. It's an older man and a younger girl, but it just works. And I was so drawn to their story right up until the end, when older Kirsten and Jeevan decide to reunite a year later. So is it difficult to get two actors like that together? So it could be more different. When one of them's a child, was there a lot of prep, or was it just super challenging, or did you find it actually not so bad, not so difficult?
You know, it's everything's a discovery process. You never know fully if it's going to work when you're doing it, but when we found Himesh and Matilda, and they did a chemistry room read in our casting office, there's just something inherently interesting about it. You know, Himesh kind of had this sort of wounded, he played Jeevan as kind of wounded, kind of aimless, likable loser kind of way, and Matilda she's just so self-possessed and, you know, sure and, you know, mature, and there was like an inverted like an inverse relationship happening, even though it's, you know, one's significantly older than the other, and there's just something about that just was like instantly captivating. So again, we just kind of like, we knew what was working about that, and we just try to build around it, you know, and try to sculpt these scenes around what was fun to watch about those two.
Yeah,
she sort of like so innately disarms his grouchiness. It's a great dynamic. And I also a big testament to our casting director Jeannie Bacharach, who did really pretty incredible work in helping find Matilda.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, she's incredible in this. I don't know if you can really pinpoint who the MVPs are on the cast, because they all bring something so beautiful and different to the show, and I've thankfully spoken to most of them. But yeah, it's just a special show where everything seems to just come together in that really beautiful, organic way, which means that then you put it out there in the world and you hope that people will see it, not ignore it. A lot of showrunners feel, you know, as long as it's not ignored. It wasn't. And then of course the critics really fell behind it. It's got 98% of Rotten Tomatoes, and I was like, who are the 2% that didn't like these? But put them aside. Like, who are these people? Let's find them. But yeah, and I just think, you know, okay, so how does that feel? You put it out, the critics love it, and the industry seems to be really behind it too. I mean, you can't really answer better than that, I don't think.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, you know. I think all you can do is make something that you love and are happy to be part of, and hope that it connects. But just given the, you know, subject matter and the time that it came out, you know, I for one wasn't sure how it was going to be received, you know, because the audience that we made it for when we first started making it didn't exist anymore. You know, it was not a speculative genre anymore, you know.
Yeah.
And we were going to be projecting towards an audience that we didn't know would come in a weird way, because you have to project towards some people being prepared to deal with their own trauma in a certain kind of way, and that takes a little time. So in many ways, you know, the fact that we were forced to take a little bit more time to make the thing and have it out there in the world was serendipitous, and I think it came out at the time that people were ready to confront it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, I really enjoyed this show. It means a lot to me and many others. Thanks so much for your time today. Congrats on a really strong series.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.